It's so nice to see such a large group of people coming together to talk about municipal politics. I love that update you just did. I wish there was a group in Toronto that did a monthly update on council of what just happened and what's coming up. Um, Most people don't think a lot about municipal politics. We can see that clearest with voter turnout, where voter turnout provincially and federally is usually in the mid 60s, low 60s, and municipally, it's a miracle if anyone gets to 50. It's lots of our cities in the GTA and in Ontario, it can be as low as 20%, 30% is quite average, and 40s is considered high. And this is outrageous because while most people might think that city halls just, decide where stop signs go and make sure that the garbage is picked up, I'm sure everyone on this call has at least a glimpse of awareness about how much more they do. And I would argue that of the three levels of government, municipal is actually at this point the most important level in our lives. On a day-to-day basis, we're affected by the choices made by our city councils more than any other level of government. But more importantly, I'm really interested in city politics because it's the most malleable. It has the most entry points for ordinary people. So if you wanted to express yourself as a citizen and be heard on a provincial or federal issue, you could phone your MP or your MPP. And first of all, you'd have trouble getting a meeting because they represent about 100,000 people each on average or more. But more importantly, they don't actually have any influence themselves within their own legislatures. We know this. It's not a conspiracy theory. MPs and MPPs are expressing their own frustration increasingly that all their votes are whipped, which means that the party whip literally tells them before every vote whether they're supposed to vote yes or no. And there are consequences for not voting along the party line. So you might persuade your MPP or your MP to, believe a certain point of view on an issue. That doesn't mean you've actually affected any change unless they happen to be extremely influential at the cabinet table, which is rare and increasingly rare because over the past few decades, we've had a concentration of power in the office of the leaders, all party leaders at all levels. We're really lucky and fortunate, and it's rare to have nonpartisan politics at the local level in Ontario, which doesn't, of course, mean your councillors aren't members of parties or that they don't sometimes vote in clusters or not even that they don't gather sometimes in small groups of 2 or 3 as party members and caucus. But no one can tell them how to vote. They don't owe anyone favors. There's no party whip that can threaten consequences for not voting a certain way, which means if you have a city council of 9, there's this magic number of 5. And if you can convince any 5 councillors who probably will meet with you because they represent a much smaller group, and they know that their chance of winning in the next election, they can't just ride a party brand or rely on the reputation of their party leader. It's really all about them. So they're much more approachable, accessible, and I find, at least definitely in Toronto politics and other cities I've looked at, the votes don't come down on clear party lines. So if you look at Queen's Park or the House of Commons, you can add up the number of Liberals, Conservatives, NDP, and a couple of Greens, and every vote, those groups vote as a block every time, no exceptions. Whereas in Toronto City Hall, when there used to be 45 members, you could have a 22 to 23 vote, a 44 to 1 vote, a 40 to 4, and it wasn't always right against left. And you'd have these issues that would really surprise you. I remember when there was a proposal for a casino in Toronto, and a lot of folks thought that the left would be against it and the right would be for it because it's a big money maker and big business wanted it. But some of the progressives actually wanted it because the unions were excited about the jobs And some of the conservatives were against it on religious grounds, that it was gambling. So you had really strange bedfellows on both sides. And in the end, our magic number for years was 23. And I didn't care if they were from the right, the left, the middle, the up, the down, the urban, the suburban, the rural, whatever. And we would make these charts and be like, how do we get our 23 votes? And do we have this counselor and that counselor? And there's nothing like that provincially or federally. I do a lot of advocacy work in Queen's Park in Ottawa, and it really comes down to, what does Doug think? What does Justin think? That's it. And how can we find someone who can influence Justin or influence Doug? It's not even about the ministers anymore. It's just these two guys. And it's so old fashioned because, I mean, that was, I kind of joke about this in my book, how, you know, the model of what power looked like, you know, 800 years ago was these really rigid pyramids of hierarchy with one guy at the top. It was always just one guy, the king, right? He would sit on a throne, and he was often sitting in the throne that his dad used to sit in. And he didn't have to talk to anyone about, you know, negotiating. He just did whatever he wanted. And it's so stunning that after we created these more rounded forms of democracy, councils, senates, legislatures, boards, that we've really culturally reverted back to the single leader model, where both provincially and federally, it's one guy in charge. And I'm not saying guy out of ignorance. I'm saying guy because right now they're actually all guys. Every premier is a guy. The prime minister is a guy. And not only is it one person with all the power, but again, they're sitting in the seats their dads used to sit in. It's unbelievable. So Justin, you know, is doing the job that his dad used to do. And we all know that Doug Ford's dad was a member of provincial parliament. His brother, of course, was my former mayor, and his nephew is now a councillor. So there's still a lot of male lineage going on within political families, which is kind of astounding. And it's not going through daughters and nieces and sisters. It's explicitly brothers and sons. In fact, I looked up the data of how many members of parliament in Ottawa have sat in the House of Commons as an MP at the same time as a brother, as one of their family brothers. And it was 117. And then I did the same for how many MPs have sat in the House of Commons at the same time as a sister. And the number was 0. This is in 2021. So there's still a lot of strange cultural things that are happening politically. But to go back to what I was saying before, the good news is that municipally, it is the most accessible. And also I think there's a higher turnover. You know, if you're in a safe liberal riding or a safe conservative riding, and the handful of safe NDP ridings, they do exist, and you've got the nomination, I mean, you can be in there for decades. Whereas councillors are a little more vulnerable. And that really comes down to good community organizing and people running sophisticated, well-organized campaigns against them, which, by the way, should be starting now. I'll talk a bit about that at the end, but the next round of municipal elections, of course, is 2022. And that might seem far away, October 2022, but it is absolutely not. If you work backwards, if any of you have done project management, you know all the steps that go into running any type of large project or campaign. The election day is on October of next year, but the campaigning starts in the spring, which means you're planning those websites and newsletters and platforms months in advance, because let's say in February, March, and April, you should be doing your graphic design for your website and your signs. You can't do the graphic design until you've written your platform. You start going back and you realize, oh, wow, we better get going soon. And I would encourage all of you to consider running or finding someone to run or supporting a counselor you like. But our elections are really important opportunity to get involved. But just as important, if not more, is what we do in between elections. How we as citizens or residents, some of you might be non-citizens, we as residents in our neighborhoods are able to express our voices and come together to leverage the power we have to make a difference. And in the absence of doing that, there are other people who will do it in your name on your behalf, whether you like it or not. There are people at City Hall every week with agendas. Those are, hold on a second, my son's calling me on FaceTime. Now he's going to think I'm ignoring him. He's going to call again. What I might have to do is answer it and say I can't talk. I'm hanging out with a bunch of folks in Richmond Hill. So as a city councilor, you're getting input from various sources. The most consistent, reliable source of input is from corporate lobbyists. I don't think they're bad people. I don't think what they do is bad. What's bad is when that developers and corporate lobbyists are there all the time making sure that their message is being heard and the citizens don't have a counter voice. Again, in between elections, that's when you get really bad policy ideas rising to the surface, like renaming your libraries after corporations, which is such a terrible idea. What makes our neighborhoods unique isn't the sidewalks, which all look the same in any neighborhood. It's not the Tim Hortons, which looks the same in every neighborhood. It's the fact that we have unique things like small businesses and our local schools and libraries. And your library is different than another neighborhood's library. You start putting corporate names on those buildings, which really we own. Like we paid for those. We paid for their capital, their construction, and we've been paying for their operating budgets for decades. No one has the right to sell that name any more than they have the right to sell your name or your children's name. It's absurd. It's no one should have the right to sell the naming rights. And what it does is it cheapens it, and it makes our neighborhoods feel like strip malls, or like you live in something that is commodified. I don't think you should commodify the unique character of a neighborhood. It's one of the most important parts of living in an urban environment. Anyways, what I write about a lot in my book, and I'll just do a quick pitch for the book. It's called Tear Down, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up. You can purchase it as an audiobook or ebook or book. You can also just get it from your library. It's in all the libraries. And what I do is I break down all the ways that we've created and perpetuated what I call a culture of exclusion, where ordinary people don't understand the ways in which their voices can be heard. And even more, I think that we've actually created a system that pushes out ordinary voices. It discourages people from getting involved. And then even when they do try to get involved, they often find the experience so alienating, confusing, hostile, hyper-partisan, that they just tune out and give up and go back to their lives. And it's so unfair because, again, the lobbyists, they're paid full time to navigate these systems. So they're going to figure it out. The counselors are paid to be a part of the system. City staff are paid to be a part of the system. And whatever local media still exists in Richmond Hill, if any, they're also paid to be in the room and watching. But to me, the whole room and the whole system should be designed for when Bev or Suzanne or Catherine or Jane shows up to a meeting. You're showing up as a volunteer. You're showing up as a resident, and the whole system should lean over backwards to accommodate your needs. If any of you have been to a council meeting, I'm guessing that you probably were confused at times because they were using jargon and language and systems that weren't designed for ordinary people to understand. The physical environment probably wasn't that welcoming. I don't know what they do in Richmond Hill City Hall, but in Toronto, there's all these signs up saying you can't even bring your own food and eat in the council chamber. which is crazy. Not only should we be allowed to eat, they should be serving food. Again, if I invited Bev Blake over to my house for lunch, the first thing I would do is say, would you like a coffee? Would you like a snack? It is this like universal signal of hospitality and welcoming. Whereas if Bev came over to my house and the first thing she saw was a sign saying, sorry, you can't bring your water or crackers into my house, it's no food allowed, I don't think she'd come back again to hang out. So there's all these little things that add up to make the whole system seem like no one even wants you there. And the truth is, a lot of folks don't want you there, because when the citizen voice is absent, the corporate voice gets anything they want. And we can see that in so many ways. So let me spend 5 more minutes talking about the bad news, because I just want to get that out of the way. And then I want to focus on all the exciting opportunities we have to make things better. But let me just share my screen quickly. As Marge mentioned, I've been doing some number crunching and making pretty charts, comparing the 30 largest cities in Ontario and ranking them on different metrics. And I'm going to be aggregating all this into something I call the Municipal Democracy Index. And it's quite possible that Richmond Hill will come out as the biggest loser of the bunch, which again is bad news, but also it's an opportunity for change. So this is election turnout in the last round of elections in 2018 for municipal elections. So really, we should all be in minimum in the 50% range. Really, I mean, getting under 50 is just an absolute disgrace. We should be in the 80% zone. But once you drop below 50, it means that it's a pretty important threshold. It means there's more people in your city who've completely lost faith in the whole system and have given up completely than those who are participating, which defeats the entire purpose of democracy. Democracy does not work if people aren't voting. There's no accountability, to refer to the name of your group. There's no accountability if people aren't participating in the one ritual we have to hold these folks accountable. So Richmond Hill is almost at the bottom of the chart here. I don't have the actual number, but it looks like it was about 27%. So that means 3 out of 4 Richmond Hill voters didn't even bother to show up. And that's not a high level. I mean, it's a very low threshold of participation to ask people once every 4 years to vote. This one looks at the disparity between underrepresented communities in the population versus council. So what population you have of Black, Indigenous, people of color in your neighborhoods compared to on your council. Sorry, it's my son again. So what you have, the goal here is 1-to-1. Which means if you have 20% visible minority in your neighborhoods, you'd have 20% visible minority on your council. 0.5 means that you're off by half. So you've got twice as many in your population as your council. And Richmond Hill is under 0.4. So you're doing pretty lousy on that. And then gender, Pickering beats you with 100% men. Sorry, you almost got the gold medal. But Pickering has no women on their council at all. It's 100, and then it looks like we're at 90% for Brantford and Windsor. But if you keep trying, you've got one woman on council now, if you can get rid of her, then you can get the gold medal. You can beat Pickering if you believe and organize. It's I think it's just staggering that in 2021 we're not at 50-50. It just seems like such a simple barrier. Why are we even still having this discussion? Women got the vote a long time ago, and so what it reveals is systemic barriers that encourage and perpetuate sort of an insiders club, where the same people, again, very often corporate leaders and very often sons and brothers and nephews, and party insiders end up rising to the top. And a lot of people are discouraged from running for a lot of reasons, and I'll get into those things in a few minutes. So that's the end of the bad news. The bad news is, I think in so many ways, our democratic system is failing us. There's a democratic deficit. You can measure it. You can measure it in lots of ways. The easiest way is to walk out on the street and ask any random person what they think about local politics. And most of them will just shrug, say, I don't know about it. I don't really care about it. I don't understand it. I doubt many of them would even know the name of their city councilor. So that's terrible. Again, it wouldn't matter in a vacuum. If citizens weren't participating, who cares? We've got a council. They'll look at all the information and hopefully they'll make a balanced decision. But when we know they're being hounded by lobbyists every day on every topic, it is absolutely crucial to have a counterbalance there. Ideally through elections as well, where people aren't just rising up through elite golf course communities, golf buddies, running for council, but more ordinary folks. But more importantly, what we do in between elections with groups like this. This is so important that you have this group and that you're offering this service to people. So let me shift now to opportunities for change. The last thing I really love about municipal politics, beside the fact that it's not partisan, it's more accessible, it's more local, is that municipal politics is often the laboratory for democratic reforms. So any important reform we've ever had started at a city hall before it went to a provincial legislature or Ottawa. And I'll just give you two really obvious examples. Most recently, there's been a discussion about whether people should be able to vote online using their phones and laptops. And there are valid security concerns around that, but there's also some very good solutions. And of course, we're all doing our banking online, so it's probably something worth looking at, especially for older folks who have mobility issues, people with disabilities, but also getting young voters who are much more likely to open an app and vote. As we all know, they have a lot of screen time, than lining up, to put a piece of paper in a box. So who's been experimenting with that? Federal elections? Absolutely not. Provincial elections? Nope. The big cities in Canada, the largest ones? Nope. Markham was the first to do it, I think 15 years ago. I mean, it's not even new anymore. And there's dozens and dozens of cities now trying it, and the provincial level hasn't even touched it. Another example is women getting the right to vote. If you Google, the timeline of democratic reforms and when women received the right to vote, you'll probably come across the milestones of when they got the provincial right and then the federal right. But if you go 10 years earlier, women had already secured the right to vote in city elections all across Canada. And then Saskatchewan was the first provincial. And then within a few years, it was all three levels. So organizing around democratic reforms municipally isn't just about making better city halls. If we can reform the way that elections work, how people are elected, how they campaign against each other, the role of lobbyists, transparency around lobbying, all those reforms trickle upwards and affect provincial and federal politics as well. So what I did for my book is, in addition to offering a really bleak but honest diagnosis of how bad I think things are, I offer about 100 concrete remedies that are available. Most of them are ideas that are already being used in other cities that address a specific problem. So I name a problem, I go into why this is a problem and how it affects you and your families and our future and the environment. And then I talk about all the different solutions that are available. Obviously, can't go through them all, but I'll just give you a few examples. One is the ballots we use. So we use, as many of you know, a system called first past the post. It sounds very normal and simple when you first are exposed to the rule. There's only one rule, which is whoever gets the most votes wins. But it's actually a pretty obscure system that's hardly used anywhere in the world because it doesn't work at all if you have more than 2 candidates. So if I was running against Allison, and me and Allison are running for mayor, and the big issue of the day is, do we want a long-haired mayor or a short-haired, semi-balding mayor? Let's say Allison wins with 60% of the vote, and I get 40% of the vote because Richmond Hill wants a long-haired mayor because long hair is beautiful. It's a sign of strength. When Samson lost his hair, he lost his strength. So they're going to vote for Allison. So that's first past the post working just fine. They wanted a long-haired mayor, and they got one. But if Marge also runs, that 60% now can split 2 ways, 30-30, and I still have my 40%. So now I'm the mayor. I'm a short-haired, balding mayor of a city that wanted a long-haired mayor. That's just introducing a third candidate. What if Catherine also runs? What if Jane runs? I mean, suddenly all these candidates with long hair are getting 10%, 7%. It adds up to 60. As long as I can make sure that no one else runs with short hair, I can easily win with only 40%. Forget 40. I can win with 30. I can win with 20. And I'm sure you have counselors who won with far less than 50% of the vote. This is a problem for a few reasons. First of all, while I can't ensure that no one else runs with short hair, I can't ensure that the short hair vote doesn't split. There is one type of vote that you can't split. You can split the long hair vote, the short hair vote, the left wing vote, the right wing vote, the green vote, the queer vote, the green vote, whatever. But there's one vote that is protected, and it's the vote for the incumbent. All right. So instead of doing long hair, short hair, now let's do I'm the mayor. I won in 2018, and the city hates my guts. I've only got 40% support, and David Crowley runs against me. So if he runs a decent campaign, he's got a really good shot at winning because my numbers are down and the city wants change. But you take that 60% who wants change or 70% who wants change and split it between Allison and Bev and Jim and Ruth and Jane, that 60 starts to break up into smaller and smaller pieces. But you know which number can't change? The support for the status quo. If there's 30% who want the guy who's in, no one can split that vote because I'm the only guy who's in. So incumbents have such a huge advantage because no one can split their vote. The only vote that can split is the vote for change. And the irony there is it punishes the wards who were the most engaged. So if I'm an unpopular counselor and one person runs against me in an apathetic ward, so out of, let's say 30,000 voters in the ward, only one person wants to run against me, I'm in trouble if my numbers are low. But if it's a really engaged ward with lots of citizen groups and youth groups and environment groups, and they're all running different people, and there's a queer candidate and an environment candidate, I don't even have to lift a finger. I'm going to win for sure because all those candidates are going to split the vote for change. The way to fix this is so simple. It's just called a ranked ballot. And the funny thing about a ranked ballot is that every political party is already using it to elect their own leaders. And the way it works is you rank your choices in order, 1, 2, 3. So if Catherine, Allison, and Marge are running against me for mayor, they get to rank their choices. So someone who supports Marge might put Allison second and Catherine third because they want a long-haired mayor. Very easy to do. You just rank your choices in order. And on that first count, when I got 40, and let's say Marge gets 35 and Allison gets 20 and Catherine gets 5, theirs adds up to 60, but I got 40. Under first past the post, I'm just declared the winner. Done. With the ranked ballot, and again, if you've ever watched a leadership race for any party, you've seen this. We look at the numbers and we say, well, no one's got a majority. There's a 40, a 35, a 25, and a whatever. We're going to do another round. Catherine had the lowest results. Sorry, Catherine. So she's out of the race, and we're just going to, but her voters still, should have a say. So anyone who wanted Catherine, we're just going to transfer their ballot to their second choice, which will go to Allison or Marge. And you just keep doing that until one of them beats me, which they should, because Richmond Hill wanted a long-haired mayor or wanted change or wanted right wing or left wing or whatever they want. But a city can only get what they want, and a ward can only get what they want using a ranked ballot. But the best part about a ranked ballot is it doesn't just change the math on election night, it changes who runs and how they run. Because to go back to first past the post, if I'm running for council, for mayor with short hair, and Allison's running against me, if people start hearing that Marge and Catherine also want to run, all the long-haired supporters are going to call them up and say, no, 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 don't run. You're going to ruin it. You're going to split the vote. And the funny thing is, we can't measure this. It happens in every election municipally. And we don't know how bad this is because you can't measure the number of people who didn't run. But I can tell you that if you have any unpopular councilors or mayor, and to be clear, I don't know or care about any of your dynamics on your council, and there's a movement to beat them, it's going to be all about pushing out voices. They're going to be like, oh, we got to beat, Todd. He's a terrible counselor. You don't have one named Todd, do you? Okay, good. So Counselor Todd, we got to get rid of him. Well, I heard that Jim and Ruth and Jane are running. We got to convince two of them not to run and not to split the vote. What could be worse than using a voting system that forces all of us to discourage our own friends from running? A ranked ballot doesn't require that. Anyone can run under a ranked ballot with no risk of splitting the vote, which means new voices are welcomed into the political landscape. Because what happens is the long-haired people are going to be like, who's our star candidate? There's 5 people with long hair who want to run. But if we want to beat Dave, we got to find who's got the best chance of beating him. And guess what? It's going to be someone whose dad used to be a city councilor. It'll like they've got some kind of all-star elite pedigree, and then everyone else is told not to run. There's a mathematical reason why our councils look the way they do. It's not because we all just love voting for older white guys. That's not the case. Part of the filtering process happens before the nominations even start. But the other part is that under first past the post, if Marge and Allison are running against me, they know that the only way that their vote can go up is if the other person's vote goes down. Allison wants to steal votes from Marge, and Marge wants to steal votes from Allison. This is where negative campaigning comes from. This is why the NDP and Liberals, who are actually very similar, hate each other's guts, which makes no sense at all. But they hate each other's guts because they both see the other one as splitting their vote. Under a ranked ballot, there's an incentive to be positive and to say nice things about your opponents. Because if I'm running for mayor, I want the supporters of my other opponents to consider ranking me second. And if I spend all the debates and the campaign attacking them and saying mean things, I'm actually hurting myself because I'm not going to get any second choices. So that's just a simple reform. It's called a ranked ballot. Doug Ford became the leader of his party using a ranked ballot. I actually wrote a report. London City Council became the first government in Canada to use a ranked ballot in 2018, and the results were astounding. You can download the report from londonleads.ca. I'll just put that in the chat. londonleads.ca. I'll also mention that I run a monthly workshop. It's free. It's on the first day of every month, where I go into detail about first past the post and what the alternatives are. Different types of ranked ballot systems, proportional systems, majoritarian systems, and I break it down into really easy, understandable things, because Canada is the only member of the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, that uses first past the post for all 3 levels of government. So while you might have learned in civics that our voting system is normal, it's actually totally fringe, and we are an outlier amongst Western countries. And the most polarized political countries are the few that are still using it for federal elections, like the US, like the UK. Anyways, I'm hosting one of these tomorrow night, April 1st, but I'm also going to do it May 1st and June 1st. I can send you information. Why don't I just post that link really quickly? How are we doing with time, Marge? I can go on and on and on.
Yeah, it's how about another can you go on another 5-10 minutes and then
Yeah,
stick around for
and then
some
we can take
Q&A?
any questions. So I'm posting the link here to Better Ballots 101. It's my monthly course, and you can RSVP through that link. And I would love to see you there, because I was just scratching the surface there with the long hair and the short hair. Sorry, it's my son again. I should be flattered that he still loves me. 16, he's calling me. Hold on a second. Santiago, I'm on a call. I'm Zooming right now with a bunch of folks in Richmond Hill. That's why I'm not answering your call. And they can hear you, and they're recording. Anyway, I should have shared my screen. He's a cutie. There's lots of other things we could do. So campaign finance reform is really important. So it's expensive to run for office, definitely running for mayor. But to run a decent campaign for councillor, if you want to have lawn signs and literature and a good website and maybe rent a storefront, that's not cheap. And you don't want to have a political culture where only wealthy people can run for office. So what we've been doing, definitely provincial and federal, is trying to find ways to insert public funding into elections to subsidize the cost of election campaigns. Some people hate this idea because they're like, well, why should the government fund candidates? Well, the reason is so we get more ordinary people running for office who aren't all lawyers and doctors and part of political families. There's different ways to do that. In Toronto, I don't think you have any subsidy right now in Richmond Hill. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Toronto, we have a subsidy. It's a rebate program. So if Marge runs for councillor in Toronto and I donate $100 to her campaign, I'll actually get a check back from the government for about $75. It's a very generous rebate, but you need to have the money up front. I don't always have $100 in my pocket, let alone $100 disposable at all. Definitely not 500 or 1,000. So that particular mechanism still benefits people who have deeper pockets because you need to have the money up front. Other systems do what's called a matching grant. So for example, let's use this idea of $100. So if I want Marge to end up with $100 under the Toronto and the Richmond Hill, I just have to have $100 that I can afford to throw away. In Toronto, I need to have $100 that I can lose for a year, knowing that I'll get 75 back. So I can leverage my 25, but I lose the interest and the liquidity of that cash for a year. A one-to-one rebate means that I give $50 to Marge and the government gives her the other $50. So she ends up with 100, but I didn't have to wait for a rebate. That's a one-to-one matching grant. You can also have a 3-to-1 grant where I give her 25 and the municipal government gives her 75. And again, she got to her 100. You could have a 10-to-1 matching grant, which I think they have that in New York now. They're either at 8-to-1 or 10-to-1. So I just have to give Marge $10 and the city government gives her 90 and now she has 100. But Seattle, I think, has the coolest program where they just send everyone $100 worth of democracy coupons, which you can give to any candidate you want, which means now literally a homeless person or a minimum wage kid working at Walmart can give $100 to a candidate. So you don't need any financial wealth up front in your pocket to financially support a campaign. So these are just simple things that are being done. Cheryl pointed out that the Ford government abolished the ranked ballot, which is true. So Kathleen Wynne brought in really amazing legislation because it didn't force any cities to use ranked ballots, but it let them use it if they wanted to. Doug Ford has completely banned ranked ballots for now, which is hilarious because he was elected leader of his party with a ranked ballot. But whatever, I've been doing political advocacy for decades, and I've learned that there's step forwards and step backs, and it's fine. We're moving in the right direction overall, And all three opposition parties, so Mike Schreiner, Del Duca, and Horvath, have all said they're going to bring back ranked ballots. Lolita asks, are there any downside to ranked ballots? I know a country that has 16 parties, for example. So that's hard to answer in a short answer. They probably have proportional representation, which is different than ranked ballots, although you can use ranked ballots in a proportional system. I would actually love to see more parties, more viable parties. I think it's really boring that we've only had two parties in power for 150 years. I don't think any of us would subscribe to Netflix if there were only two movies to watch, or go to a restaurant if there were only two items on the menu. I think it's really important to have choice. And there's some dysfunctional countries using different voting systems like Israel or Italy. But for the most part, countries using more elaborate and sophisticated and modern systems, what they have is a whole bunch of parties working together collaboratively and very successfully and with a lot of stability. New Zealand's a great example because, of course, they used to have our system. They're a British, colony, former colony, Westminster model. They switched to a proportional system, same one that Germany uses, mixed member proportional. And they have a female leader of the Labour Party they've done well with COVID, and I don't think anyone would call it a radical, unstable country. But not only that, in their last parliament, she had to form a coalition with the Greens because she didn't have a majority. And then the next election, she actually won a majority of the seats, didn't need to work with anyone, but offered the Green Party portfolio positions anyways, just because she thought it was nicer to work with another party. So I'm less interested in how many parties we have and more interested in the degree to which there's so much hostility now, where our parliaments are like one group stands up and the other group hurls insults, and the other group stands up and they hurl insults. And it's like a kindergarten or a hockey game. And we would all benefit from having more choice, more parties, never having to vote strategically, and then having parties working together with more civility at all three levels of government. I'll mention one more fun reform. It's called a participatory budget. And the idea here is, there's these ideas of direct democracy where you get rid of representatives entirely and all the people are in charge of everything with apps, going back to the Greek Athenian model where everyone just gathers in a town hall. I don't support that. I like the idea of having a city council and a legislature. I don't want to have to read all those staff reports and vote on every item. But there's middle grounds. There's ways of implementing versions of direct democracy in certain ways that actually make sense. So one is referendums. I'm a fan of referendums if they're designed properly. They can be done in ways that are rushed. People are uninformed and they vote in very polarized, uninformed ways. I would argue that Brexit was probably an example of that. But a referendum done properly is a great way to give power back to people. And instead of having counselors decide things on our behalf, every now and then we could just be asked ourselves. I think namings of buildings, for example, is a great example. There was a big debate. I write about this in my book. There was a big debate 6 or 7 years ago in Toronto about whether we should name a community center after Rob Ford, after he had passed away. Some people in his neighborhood loved the idea. Others who were concerned about, his drug use and other things didn't like it. And city council was having this big debate. And the Toronto Sun was in favor, the Toronto Star was against, whatever. And I wrote a thing on Facebook saying, why is this up to council? And why are councilors who have never stepped foot in this neighborhood voting on the name of a community center that they're never going to see in their lives? Especially a city as big as Toronto. Why is a downtown Toronto or a Scarborough councillor voting on the name of a community center in Etobicoke? And I said, the people who use the community center should call it whatever the hell they want. Not only does it affect them because they go there, but we literally, again, we pay for these things. They're ours. So the example I wanted to give, though, is called a participatory budget. It takes a small sliver of the city's annual capital budget, breaks it up by neighborhood or ward, and says, okay, Ward 4, you've got 300,000 bucks. You can do whatever you want with it. What do you want to do? And you have a town hall, and Bev shows up and says, all the lighting is broken in my park. I don't feel safe. I want to fix up the lighting. And Allison shows up and says, I'd love to see more bike parking on John Street. And Paul says, my kids would love to see a new jungle gym at the community center, whatever. You just pitch ideas. And then city staff are there and they say, yeah, well, that's not possible because of this, or that would cost too much, but okay, we can do that. So it goes through a professional vetting process, and you end up with all these proposals, and then the residents just vote, and you decide what to do with your own money in your own neighborhood, because it's your tax dollars and it's your neighborhood. So anywhere where we could find these little opportunities to make democracy more accessible and easier to understand and closer to home is really valuable. So again, I've put all these ideas into my book. You can listen to it on an audio thing. You can get it from your library. I'm happy to speak to any group like this anytime to spread the gospel. And most importantly, don't forget the power of next year's election. Get involved with the campaign. Consider running yourself. And then whoever wins, try and figure out how to use the following 4 years to organize neighborhoods and ordinary residents to amplify their voices so that councilors aren't just hearing from lobbyists all the time. I really think we can transform a culture of disengagement into a culture of participation if we can see democracy as something that is worthy of experimenting and innovating, and not just doing it the same way our grandparents did just because, but looking for opportunity for change.